Hey everybody, welcome to Box Talks and Ring Walks. Jesse here. Uh, Pretty lackluster weekend over the weekend, so not gonna cover very much of it. There's a card on Showtime, some up and comers uh, looked good, some of them didn't look good. Uh, Not a whole lot that I want to get into with that. Thomas Mattis got a eighth round technical knockout over Michael Dutchover, and Ruben Villa got a unanimous decision against Jose Enrique Dorantes Vivas. Um, Lightweight and featherweights, respectively, and that's pretty much all there is to say about that. We'll see how their careers progress in the future. Hopefully, I'll be talking about them in a few years down the road. Fox Sports on Saturday night had a interesting card. We saw Chris Colbert knock out Miguel Beltran Jr. in the first round. We saw Peter Quillen lose a split decision to Alfredo Angulo in what was, to me, an upset. As far as I thought Quillen was going to win, but then watching the fight, I think Angulo definitely deserved the decision. It was a split decision, so there were several close rounds. But I also scored the fight for Angulo. The more interesting fight in that card, though, was Tomas Dulorme against Terrell Williams. I talked about this fight briefly last week, where I said it looked like Terrell Williams was a middling contender ready for his first test against Dulorme. Well, he had his first test and he failed. However, he failed with like a D and not with an F, we'll say that. He lost the fight, but he didn't look bad. He did not get knocked out. It was a unanimous decision, 10-round fight. Terrell Williams hit the canvas in the 10th round, which Dulorme did not need to do that to get the win, but he did it anyways. I scored 4 rounds for Terrell Williams, and that was the absolute most rounds you could give him. I know a lot of people gave him 3 or even 2. But I couldn't see anybody giving him 5 rounds. And so Dulorme really dominated. Dulorme looked good. Dulorme just came off of a draw against Jesse Vargas, and I imagine probably wants to rematch Jesse Vargas now. We'll see what Jesse Vargas wants to do. I'd like to see that. I think that's a good matchup. And then the winner could really cement themselves for a title shot. Dulorme has already fought Terence Crawford and lost. I can't see him fighting Terence Crawford and winning. I don't think that's a rematch anybody really needs. But I can't see him taking on like an Errol Spence or a Sean Porter and winning that either. I think he's kind of at the level he's gonna be at for his career. But I mean, he could prove me wrong and I'd be thrilled. But I think this is where we're gonna see Thomas Dulorme be at, is a gatekeeper for contenders like Williams, and occasionally getting those title shots just to show us how good our champs are. But a pretty good fight. Williams looked okay. He won a few rounds. He was the aggressor early on, and I'm excited to see where he goes from here, because after a loss, he was an undefeated fighter. He was 18-0 going in, and now he's 18-1. And where he goes from here will be really interesting, because 18-1 is still a great record. And if he can turn around, get a victory, and maybe a couple victories and get another shot, I could see him going somewhere in the future. He is like 35 though, if I'm remembering that correctly. And yep, I just looked it up. He's 35, and he's got like a family and stuff. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe Terrell Williams' goal is not boxing, which is great. He'll probably be happier with a wife and a family than he will be as a welterweight champion. But I know distractions like that can can, not do, but can interfere with a fighter. So I'm wondering if Terrell Williams maybe is never going to be up at that level, because I think he's 35, and at the level he is, that kind of means to me his career was off to a slow start. And I think he's got other things on his mind, which is good for him. But we'll see what happens with Terrell Williams in the future. That was essentially our weekend. Not a lot going on. It's one of those slow weekends in boxing. Last weekend we had Tyson Fury. Next weekend we have Spence Porter. So this was bound to be kind of a little slow. But there is some news budding about Terence Crawford probably going to take on mandatory challenger Kavaliauskas, and I apologize because this man is Lithuanian, and I think it is Kavaliauskas, but that's just my best guess. I'm not even going to try with his first name. Google him. He looks pretty good. He just came off of a draw against Ray Robinson. That's obviously the modern Ray Robinson and not the greatest of all time Ray Robinson. And I think I watched that fight against Ray Robinson. Yes, I did. And he looked good. Because I thought Ray was going to win that. But he started to change my mind about Ray. He's 21-0-1 with 17 KOs. That puts his KO percentage at 77%. This is a good fight for Bud. This is not a fight that I think anyone is worried about Bud Crawford losing. But he has not been in a fight that I think anyone was worried about him losing, which speaks to how good he is and not necessarily his level of competition. Terence Crawford is 35-0 and is just a powerhouse. He's arguably the pound-for-pound king. It is clearly Terence Crawford and Vasily Lomachenko at 1 and 2, however you want to put them. I at times have had Loma at number 1, and at other times I've had Terence Crawford at number 1 for pound. I wouldn't argue with anybody who said those guys were at 1 or those guys were at 2. So that's the exciting thing to watch. The less exciting thing to watch is all the other things happening at welterweight, because Terence Crawford is over at Top Rank and with ESPN, whereas the other welterweight champions, we've got Errol Spence, we've got Sean Porter, we've got Manny Pacquiao, they are with the PBC and they're on Fox and Showtime. This obviously, you can get into the boxing politics talk, but this causes problems for Terence Crawford because, one, those fights are hard to make anyways, and two, those are dangerous fights for Spence and Pacquiao and Porter. Their promoters aren't going to want to make those fights if there's any kind of trouble in making them, because they're dangerous. I wouldn't want to fight Terence Crawford. Hardly anybody would want Terence Crawford. I think that Errol Spence wants Terence Crawford because Errol Spence thinks he's the best in the world and has every reason to believe he's best in the world, and he wants Crawford. But I don't think his promoters want that fight. At least not yet. I think they want Crawford to sort of get a little bit older and then have Spence come in. I'm expecting that fight, although, to happen probably 2021. I think we're going to see Spence Porter this weekend. We're going to see Spence beat Sean Porter. That's my prediction. I'm going to say a unanimous decision for Spence. And then I think we're going to see him take on Manny Pacquiao. And I think we're going to see him send Manny Pacquiao into retirement. And it's going to be sort of this symbolic passing of the torch. Which that's fun. Those are good fights. I'm not mad about seeing Spence Porter, and I'm not mad about seeing uh, Pacquiao Spence. Or I mean, say that Sean Porter beats Spence. What's going to happen there? Uh, is Porter going to take on Pacquiao? That's all kinds of fun things going to be happening in the division. And then you've got people like Danny Garcia who want some of the smoke from the top guys. And he's also with PBC, so Spence Porter could take on Danny Garcia easily. Manny Pacquiao could take on Danny Garcia. Um, we had Keith Thurman, who looked good against Pacquiao, but not good enough to win. Um, but now his hand is hurt. He's going to be out until uh, next year, and I don't know. That's a lot of injuries for one-time Thurman, and I think his one time might be over. But we'll see. I don't want to call anybody out until they're out. He'll get the full 10 count, but he's definitely on the canvas. Mikey Garcia is sort of a wild card. He lost against Spence, but that was kind of predicted. He was coming up 2 weight classes. What's he going to do at welterweight? Now, I've heard a lot about Mikey Garcia versus Danny Garcia, Mexican pay-per-view showdown. Could be fun to see. Um, and then, yeah, there's guys like Cavaliaskas, there's guys like Tomas Dulorme, and Ugas. Urandis Ugas is the other guy that's going to be causing some troubles for those top fighters. Ugas is already, I think he's sort of in the boat with Dulorme. I think that his time is over and he's where he's going to stay at that contender level. I don't see him beating Crawford, Spence, Pacquiao, or Porter. But it's an exciting division. Probably the most exciting division in boxing right now. Middleweight and heavyweight also very exciting. Although if Canelo goes to light heavyweight and doesn't come back, that makes middleweight less interesting. But still got a lot of good talent in there. Speaking of middleweight, there's been a lot of news about Canelo talking about Triple G, and it's the kind of news that I don't like covering. I don't like talking about on this show because fighters and promoters say things all the time. They're constantly saying things about potential opponents or past opponents or future opponents, and they're constantly selling their fighters and selling themselves. And it's not news to me. So basically what happened was Canelo said that he's got nothing to gain from a trilogy fight with Triple G. He doesn't want it. That may or may not be true. And people are mad because, a lot of people don't think that he even beat Triple G the first time and maybe not even the second time. And so he does have something to prove because he's never beat him. He needs to beat him. But to Canelo, he fought him to a draw the first time and he beat him the second time. He doesn't have anything to prove. And Triple G hasn't done anything since the loss to Canelo. He's right about in that respect. Triple G hasn't done anything. So if Triple G comes back and starts, taking over middleweight, I think then what Canelo is saying is then there might be something to gain from a trilogy fight. But he's saying, who cares about a Triple G fight right now when Triple G hasn't done anything? And I think there's merit to that. But also, like I was saying, these kinds of conversations are just fighters talk about other guys. Like when Wilder says something about Tyson Fury's performance against Otto Wallin, it doesn't matter. Deontay Wilder is just trying to sell the fact that he and Tyson Fury are rematching in the future. It's not actual news. I don't think it's worthy of being covered. So that's really the other big news for the week. So, pretty slow weekend for boxing. Next weekend should be very exciting. Um, we have got Daniel Dubois fighting in London on Friday. We'll see how that goes. Dubois is sort of a up and comer, could be a heavyweight contender, could be a heavyweight champion if things fall in place. But we'll see. I'm not ready to say anything like that yet, but Dubois, it'll be a fun fight to watch. It's in London, so if you are American like me, that means the fight's probably going to be in the afternoon. So Friday afternoon, a lot of people probably aren't going to be watching boxing, and I'm going to try and catch it, but I might have to end up missing it as well. Then Saturday is the real fight. We've got Spence Porter. Huge fight for welterweight. WBC and IBF welterweight titles on the line. Spence 25-0 as the favorite. Sean Porter 30-2-1 as a lesser favorite, but still almost a 50-50 fight. Exciting, two champions unifying. This is what we love to see in boxing. This is the stuff that we want to get to. Everything else is just whetting our appetites for these kind of fights. Spence, Porter, it's exciting, and hopefully it'll be a good fight. Sometimes these exciting fights turn out pretty poorly, like Mayweather-Pacquiao, and sometimes they live up to expectations. So also on that card, we've got Anthony Dirrell and David Benavidez for Dirrell's WBC super middleweight title. That should be a good fight. Benavidez is 21-0, taking on the champ Dirrell. I think Benavidez stands a chance. I think we could see a new titleist in super middle, and super middle is already kind of an interesting division. The winner is probably interested in unification with Callum Smith, and I'm interested in any fight that Callum Smith is a part of. So super middle is a fun little division to keep track of. And then we've got Mario Barrios taking on Batir Akhmedov for a vacant regular junior welterweight title, which is stupid and made up. I hate the regular titles and the intermediate champ or whatever they call it. I like having just the one belt. But that's cool. They can be the regular champ. It's interim. That's the other word I was looking for. And it's sort of Mario Barrios against Batir Akhmedov is just an interesting fight. It's a good fight. Akhmedov sort of coming out of nowhere. He's 7-0. So I don't know. He's got he's at 85% KO ratio. 6 of his 7 victories are KOs. So that's kind of cool. But Barrios is a little bit more. Well, not 24-0. It's interesting that he's fighting somebody who's only 7-0. We'll see how that goes. There's probably more of a storyline for each of those guys that they'll talk about in the broadcast. So that's an interesting fight. Looks like 2 contenders going at it, which is not always what you like to see, but I'll be interested to see how that goes. That's obviously the big fight of next weekend is Spence Porter, and I'm not going to put say a fight's more interesting than Spence Porter, because that would be crazy. But that Barrios Akhmedov, I'd keep an eye on that fight. That might turn out to be really interesting. So that is all of the fights for next week. Probably a lot more discussion on welterweight after the Spence Porter. We're going to talk about what's next for Spence and what's next for Porter next week. I think if Spence wins, Manny Pacquiao is what's next for him. And if Sean Porter wins, probably the same thing. I think they both want to unify the division because they're fighting each other, and the other belts are Manny Pacquiao and Terrence Crawford, and they're not going after Terrence Crawford because, again, he's at top rank. So, also, I will be interested to see in the broadcast when Manny Pacquiao took on Keith Thurman. They had a little graphic of all of the welterweight champs, but just left Terrence Crawford off. Manny Pacquiao, before beating Keith Thurman, had one of the regular or interim titles, and they put that up there. They put that Manny Pacquiao was a champ. And Manny Pacquiao has reached the point in his career where he doesn't need a belt for you to call him the champ, right? Like, you could put Manny Pacquiao up there even if he had no belt, and nobody would have been like, why is Manny Pacquiao up there? He's Manny Pacquiao. So it's fine that he was up there with a regular belt, but the fact that Terrence Crawford wasn't up there at all, and they're talking about the landscape of welterweight, and left out Terrence Crawford, it's upsetting. It was upsetting to me watching that fight, and it inspired me to try and start this podcast, actually, because I was like, somebody needs to cover boxing honestly and not leave people out for politics reasons. So here we are, talking about Spence and Porter need to take on Crawford in the future, and I think we're going to see Spence Crawford 2021. That's what I'm hoping for. And I know we talked last week where the unification, the champs fighting champs, doesn't have to happen all the time, every fight, but it does need to happen. So I can be patient with Spence Crawford, but I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait. And there's other belts out there. So I think Spence Porter, and they win this, they're going to go after Manny Pacquiao's belt next. And then it's going to be all hands on deck for Terrence Crawford, who's going to take care of the mandatory against Kavaliauskas, who could surprise us. That's the awesome thing about boxing, is any one of these fights that I'm predicting, it's a sport where it can change just like that, and Crawford could lose to Kavaliauskas, and then the landscape changes. But Crawford, he's pound for pound. He's amazing. He is one of the best in the sport right now. Really fun to watch. Also, I heard on his Kavaliauskas card, Teofimo Lopez is supposed to be taking on Richard Comey, and that right there, that's a card. Just those two fights, that's awesome, because Lopez versus Richard Comey is big, and the winner of that is definitely gonna want Loma, and Loma is definitely gonna want the winner of that. So that's exciting. That's one of the more anticipated fights because it's supposed to happen in the fall. One of the more anticipated fights of the year. We've also got AJ and Ruiz rematch coming up in the fall. Talk about that more when we get closer to it. So the end of the year should make up for kind of what a slow year 2019 was. And then I think 2020 is going to be a bit more exciting. It's going to be closer to how 2018 was. This year is sort of an off year. And this week is sort of an off week. So it's a little bit shorter of an episode, but I think that's all we need to cover. So hope you enjoyed it. Sorry that was a little bit quicker. Let me know what you think. If you're enjoying the podcast, what else you'd like to hear me talk about and cover. And Have a good week.